Hey everyone, welcome to my round 4 recap from the Biel Chess Festival. I just had a really fun game, finished about an hour ago, and I was playing a Swiss player by the name of Christian Mark Arseni. And I actually just realized a feature on Chess. We can click the name. Most names are clickable within the broadcast, and you can see more information about the player. This links to their FIDE profile. But yeah, we can see that I did play a teenager, and can also see the games that they've played in Chess broadcasts previously. And I actually use this feature in preparing for my opponent because one of the things I like to look at before I play any opponent is how they manage their time in their games. And I noticed with this opponent specifically that he likes to blitz out pretty much every opening that he plays. And this game was no exception, at least for the first several moves. So he played e4, and I went into a Sicilian. And rather than repeating my opening from round 2 and maybe going for a dragon, I opted for e6, going for a Taimanov. And we went into main line, takes, and knight c6, knight c3, and queen to c7. And this is really the starting position of the Taimanov Sicilian. It's an opening that I've played for probably over 15 years now, and one of my main weapons from black pieces. And in this position, my opponent played bishop to e3, which is the main line. I play a6, and then my opponent surprised me, and he blitzed out his next move, pawn to a3. I'll go ahead and hide notation to avoid spoilers. But yeah, unfortunately, I did not check this move before the game, and I didn't see my opponent play this move in any of his previous games. I was expecting some other lines. But when this move came on the board, I was a little bit unhappy because the last time I encountered this move in a serious tournament was back in 2018. I played a strong grandmaster Motolev in Denmark, and we played into a very theoretical line after knight f6, pawn f4, and in that game I played pawn to d6. But the last time I really looked at this line seriously was probably back in 2018 when I was preparing for that game, and I didn't really have any preparation in mind going into this line. So I took some time here and was trying to figure out some way to deviate from the main line and still try and get a playable position. And after about 5 minutes of thinking, I decided not to go for the main line pawn d6, but rather play the move pawn to d5. And the point of this move is basically to contest the center right away and provoke white to play e5, which my opponent did pretty quickly. And after knight to d7, this no longer resembles a Sicilian defense. This actually resembles a French defense. And this is a very typical structure that you can get from a French. If I just go back, I'll show one of the main lines in the French is this. After knight c3, knight f6, f4, knight d7. Yeah, did I say f4? f4 here. And then c5, knight f3, takes. Actually, not takes. I think knight c6 is more played. Bishop e3. Let's say c takes d4, knight takes d4. If we compare this position to what I got in the game after knight d7, we can see it's very, very similar. Now, I don't really play the French as black, but I went for this because I thought it's actually an easy position to understand. Like very often black will play on the queen side with b5, maybe eventually b4, put a knight on c5 or bishop on c5, and yeah, just play chess. And if white castles queenside, then it can lead to an attacking game. And very often black will play g6 and h5 and try and prevent white from storming on the king side. So yeah, even though this is not a structure that I play so often, I still had some idea of what the strategies were. And I was happy that my opponent started taking time here, so he was no longer blitzing out his moves, and he spent some time before playing the move queen to g4. And this is a really interesting move, because not only is it a prophylactic move, he's basically tying down my bishop to defending g7, but he's also trying to bait me into playing pawn h5. And pawn h5 actually looks very natural for black. Why not kick the queen and, yeah, gain some time? But when I was trying to calculate this, I realized that it's pretty dangerous because this move allows white to sacrifice the knight on e6. And I didn't really want to go for this. Like if knight takes e6, pawn takes e6, queen takes e6, then it just looks really scary. Now, I'm not sure if white's actually winning here. If I play knight e7, knight takes d5. I was calculating this during the game, and I have the move queen a5 check, which would provoke the knight back to c3. But I didn't want to give my opponent so much fun with these potential sacks. So after a bit of thought, I decided to play a relatively safe and improving move, knight to c5. And there's a few points behind this move. First of all, I do unleash the bishop, so I'm trying to make it impossible for white to sack. I'm also trying to discourage white's eventual break, pawn f5. And I'm also improving the knight. So even though maybe the bishop wanted to come to c5, the bishop is doing its job defending g7. And this knight has potential to control some nice key squares on the queen side and in the center. I am discouraging bishop to e3, also creating the possibility of maybe at some point playing knight e4 to change the structure. So after I played knight c5, my opponent castled queenside. And I was actually happy to see this move, even though it is a very ambitious move for white, committing the king to the queen side. It does lead to a very sharp middle game where I'm going to have a lot of attacking potential. And I thought that maybe it's safer for white to castle kingside, like maybe start with bishop e2, castle kingside, and play a bit more positionally. But castling queenside was a sign that my opponent does want to fight. So I reply here with bishop to d7. My opponent plays king to b1. Very typical move when you castle queenside to sidestep the king, so it's a bit safer. And here I go for the move pawn to b5. So I'm really trying to waste no time and yeah, just creating the possibility of pawn to b4. And I thought that if I can open the b file and align my rook with my opponent's king, then good things can happen very quickly. And we're going to see things get pretty difficult for white. After my opponent plays bishop to e2, I play rook b8, and then he plays queen to g3. So these moves may have been a little bit slow, and they gave me time to just open the b file. I play pawn to b4. And this is one of the drawbacks with white having committed to a3 and also committing the king to the queen side, is now I'm forcibly opening the b file. And there's really no stopping me from getting my rook into play. My opponent pretty much had to take on b4, and then I take back with the rook. And I was already feeling like really, really good here. We're just on move 15, but it does seem like black is dictating play. And I'm ready to potentially move my queen to the b file, double up, and start targeting the b pawn. And here my opponent took some time and played the move pawn to f5, which I'm not sure if this was desperation or maybe he was just trying to make the game as sharp as possible. But it is definitely an idea for white in the position to open the center and try and shift the focus away from the queen side. And this move does give me a lot of options. Of course, creating the tension between these pawns, but leaving the pawn on e5 hanging. And when my opponent first played this move, I began trying to calculate, like, can I just take the pawn on e5? And eventually I concluded that this is probably a bit too dangerous because after bishop f4, white has this battery on the diagonal, also the pin against the knight. And then if I play bishop d6, then white can take on g7, and then white would be taking over the initiative. So I didn't want to take with the knight, and I also didn't want to take with the queen because then white has bishop f4, and my queen is nearly trapped here. I think the only safe square is queen f6, and at the very least, white can repeat bishop g5, queen e5, bishop f4, and I definitely did not want to take a draw in such a position. So after rejecting the moves of taking on e5, I was looking for other options in the position, and the move that came to mind was simply moving my queen to the b file to attack the pawn on b2. And I was mainly debating between queen b6, queen b7, and queen b8, all of which create the battery against the b2 pawn. And ultimately, I decided to play the move queen to b8. I thought this is the most useful square for the queen, still keeping an eye on e5 pawn and making the very simple threat of rook takes b2. And it turns out that white really doesn't have too many options to defend here. The move bishop c1 would defend the pawn, but leave the knight on d4 hanging. So bishop c1 is not playable. And if he plays knight takes c6, trying to simplify, I don't have to take back right away. I can play the in-between move, rook takes b2, and after king c1, then take the knight, and this would be really, really good for black. So my opponent was under a lot of pressure here, and he ended up playing the move pawn b3, which looks like the only move to save the pawn and try and hold on to the position. But actually, when I played queen b8, I had anticipated b3 and saw a very nice tactical sequence, which I think is completely winning for black. And this is probably a nice exercise. Like if you want to pause the video and try and find the way black can just crash through with attack, feel free to do so. But the move that I played and I'd seen from a distance is knight takes b3, simply sacking the knight, but completely destroying white's whole queenside. And I don't think white has any hope after this move, because after he takes on b3, I sacrifice my rook, rook takes b3, and after takes, I am winning back material. The king is now without much shelter, and I'm going to win the knight with check. He played the move king a1, I take the knight with check, take king b1, I move back to b3, he moves back to a1, and I'm not even really down material here. I'm basically down the exchange, but I have a couple pawns for it. But more importantly, I have the initiative and the attack. White's king is completely naked in the corner, and I play the move knight to b4. And this pretty much finishes the game because I'm threatening this checkmate and this checkmate. The only way white can defend is rook to d2, and then I still go for knight c2, winning back the exchange. So now I'm up 2 pawns, and I still have the initiative. I'm attacking his bishop on e2. And yeah, it only gets better for black from here. My opponent tried rook to b1, and then I played queen a4, forcing the king to b2, and then queen a3. And after king to c2, I played bishop a4. And my opponent threw in the towel here. If he plays king d2, then bishop b4 is pretty much lights out. I think it's probably forced mate. Like after rook takes b4, queen takes b4, I was trying to calculate until mate. And yeah, there's some lines where the king might walk up. I'm a little bit disappointed my opponent resigned because maybe there's some like chances to castle with checkmate, like in some alternate universe. I don't know if I can orchestrate it here. Like let's say this and then castle would have been a nice finish. But yeah, the game ended after I played bishop a4 check. And overall, it was, I think, a really smooth, clean attacking game. I'm not exactly sure what my opponent's losing mistake was, because we go back to this position, it did seem like b3 was the only try. I was told that maybe, yeah, white could have survived with king a1, but this is a very difficult move to play because after rook takes b2, and the king does not look happy on a1, queen is ready to come in. But yeah, according to the engine, there is rook b1. White can trade rooks and maybe just try and cope with being down a pawn. But yeah, we should go back to earlier. I'm curious what the engine recommends for white, like out of the opening. Queen g4 is the most played move in the master's database. A very fine move according to the engine. Oh, apparently h5 is playable. Knight takes e6. It's still scary. Yeah, I don't think h5 is like the best practical choice. So I played knight c5, and yeah, I'm guessing white probably should have played bishop e2, top engine move, and let's say bishop d7. Okay, castling both ways are both playable moves. Castling kingside probably is a bit safer, a bit more controlled for white. And in the game, Yeah, so white's still fine here. Wow, so f5 in this position. Engine giving plus zero point 0.7. That's hard to find though because knight takes e5? Queen g5, wow. Black's up a pawn, but engine says it's +1 for white. Yeah, honestly, I don't understand this line at all. I think it would take some more digging with engine to get a grasp of what's going on here. I mean, I guess white does have compensation with the center opening and black's king not having the safest place. But yeah, it's not easy to play such a move without being prepared. And after bishop e2, oh, still f5. And if I takes queen g3, yeah, I guess there is some annoying compensation. Already almost +2. Wow. Yeah, that's actually crazy that like the game could have been a completely different story if my opponent was a bit quicker to act on the king side. But okay, I guess I'm fortunate that my opponent played a bit slowly, played f5 a little bit too late, and I was the first one to throw punches, and knight takes b3 was a pretty deadly punch. So, okay, yeah, I'm still happy with the game overall. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.